driving again. I wanted to talk about Canada, my relation to it in terms of what I do in terms of plein air painting, but also the sort of greater socioeconomic and cultural context of Canada. And so hopefully you enjoy this because two things. One that I want to cover is this recent little plein air trip I did with my mother. And another is this article I read in Palladium magazine that came out a little bit ago. Maybe was it a few years ago, or was it? No, it must be more recent than that. About the state of Canada and the sort of what this author, I forget his name, this Vancouver-based author called the sort of like Brezhnevism of the current Laurentian elites. And so I think I'll cover the political angle, the socioeconomic and political angle first, and then I'll get to this trip because it's relevant later on in terms of the experience of current day Canada. But I'll just really quickly say what happened. So I went with my mother to Queenston Heights, which is a location in Niagara Falls. I have a YouTube short where my mother's recording me doing this quick study. So I did this like really quick study of this famous location overlooking, I believe it's a part, overlooking the gorge. I believe it's part of Lake Erie. I could be wrong. It may be a part of Lake Ontario. I'm not very good with locations. And next to this fancy restaurant that my great aunt used to work at when she was living here before she passed away. And it was very nice. I just did this really quick panorama study. I have to make more painting panel boards in that size because I noticed the panorama ones do, I thought that it wasn't going to work out in terms of the size, that you can't really fit a lot, but you can actually fit quite a bit if you're measuring correctly. So I did this quick study, and there's a short on YouTube. I like to finish them, but I'll probably release pictures of it, especially when I go back and do a more fully fleshed out study in the same location. We went there, and then we went to this pretty well-known place in Niagara Falls called the Queen's Coach Family Restaurant. And it's sort of like this, it used to be literally a barn back in the day. I think it was actually a horse barn. And it's kind of like still a dingy hole in the wall. They hadn't like updated it in a while, but it was very nice. The food is nice. They have a huge menu. I think they have like a lot of vegan options if you're into that. And it was very nice. It was very cozy. They had a lot of Christmas decorations up already. I noticed as the years go on, people are sort of, no, not that like I'm going to give you a slop take about like, oh, the woke is going away, because it's clearly not. But I noticed people are sort of unafraid to say Merry Christmas again. And so it was very cozy. It was like peak Niagara experience. And I got a little work in. And I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, this is very nice. This is very cozy. I know I blackpill a lot on the state of Canada as it is. But it was a very, like, affirming experience. And it made me really think about more, or at least put into coherent thought, what I do, why I do it. We were driving up and down these fancier places, and some of them richer houses I felt like that were overlooking this huge gorge. I felt like, what if I just like knock on this person's door and be like, listen, I know it's a very strange request, but I'm a painter and like I would love to, go to your backyard and paint something. I wouldn't be a huge imposition. And, if you want me to do a bigger one, in the studio, I could actually, do a painting on your property, and maybe that would be a novelty thing. I could. This is the type of demographic I have to sell to. You know what I mean? I know I'm probably going to bash the boomers a little bit in this communique, this talk, but this is a demographic. To me, it cemented how important it is that I've been to these places. I remember going when I was a kid to Queenston Heights with my friends, and we went a few times with the school. How important it was that I experience all of these places that I've been going to since I was a little kid with new eyes, through the eyes of the artist. Even as I'm driving now on the highway, there's so many places I wish I could stop, but I have sort of a long drive ahead of me. These places that I've been to since I was a kid, that you're seeing them with new eyes as an artist, and your need to depict things, in some cases, depict landscapes that will not be there forever, as they are chewed up for cheap subdivisional houses that actually nobody can afford, except if you're, one of these newly landed people with money. Then you buy them up and you rent them out, and you like jam 12 people in there. So it's very tragic. And some of these places, they're not going to exist as pristine as they are anymore. But so I had this peak experience, and I was thinking about, I'm blessed in the sense that there's a lot of things now, landscapes that are very beautiful, and not in the sense of like they're beautiful in the terms of just, well, that's what people will enjoy and I can sell them easily, but beautiful, sort of compositionally beautiful. There's a difference. There is, even in the most mundane of landscapes, a sort of compositional harmony that I can see, and I've managed to do a lot of plein air studies, a lot of plein air pieces, where even the most mundane of landscapes, I can sort of pull out an exciting composition, especially in the autumn, which is one of my favorite times of year. And I've yet to actually, because of personal circumstances, because of my own personal health circumstances, for many years I sort of didn't go outside doing plein air painting. So I never really got the chance to do it in the winter. And so this year, hopefully, I've remedied that, switching to oil colors with plein air. And the vast majority of my work still in the studio will be acrylic. But I want to really go outside in the winter, and hopefully you'll see a bunch of videos of, I actually bought myself a better camera. I gave myself a little early Christmas and birthday present, because me and very funny, the cosmos works in mysterious ways. But both me and Prudentialist, my co-host on DA, Digital Archipelago, both of our birthdays are on December 23rd. He's a few years younger than me. But I believe this year's the big 3-0 for him, and I'm going to be 33. So I was thinking about like how meaningful it is, and how, to me, it's, especially with the painting videos, being serious and doing things that I want to do, because the podcasting, the political hot takes are getting more, as they become more vicious and the market share becomes smaller, there is like a sort of mustiness to things in terms of giving your political take on the news, even if you are a quote-unquote dissident. It mimics what Bret Easton Ellis said when he did a video, or rather he did a little blurb on his podcast about the Paul Thomas Anderson film. And by the way, I'm going to review two Paul Thomas Anderson films with Jay Burden, one on his podcast, The Jay Burden Show, and one on mine, Content Minded, where I'm going to review on his the film Phantom Threads, and hopefully I can get him on to review Magnolia, because Magnolia, someone paid me to review. And if you want a paid request for a film or an article review, please don't message me. My usual fee is $100 for a film or an article, and a bit more for a book. He said this about the latest Paul Thomas Anderson film, One Battle After Another, where he called it liberal mustiness. But I think there's you could say that about anything. You could say that there's a MAGA mustiness, there's a dissident mustiness, there's a irony leftist mustiness. In that there is, if you were growing up in the 2010s, there is a lot of cultural and political signifiers. There's a lot of images of thought, put it that way, thinking behind thinking, that there is when it comes to these various like political movements on the mainstream and outside of the mainstream. And a lot of these movements have crystallized to where they're sort of offering the same takes. They're fighting for market share. The take sellers are they may not present it as this way. And I know, like, as an American, not someone who is outside of America, but, very close to America, and someone who's majority of my audience, I have to tread lightly. I don't want to come off as, this like Canadian thing where it's like I hate America no matter what. I don't know. I think there's like a based version. There's like a more proper version of being skeptical of Americanism. And then there's like the cringe, like beef lib, Canadian lib wave, like, everything in America is evil and right wing and terrible. It's totally divorced from the actual facts, but there is like certainly a viable criticism of MAGA and the sort of like take selling economy in America. There's obviously a lot of criticism there. And this is what I'm getting at. There's a sense of like a, dissident mustiness as there is a liberal mustiness, because we've been in the presence of these things for like over 10 years now. And I think that something new is going to come along, as it's already happening. And a lot of people are speculating, but then a lot of people are going to cling on. And there's a lot of people that people talk about on the right, but also on the left. There is a lot of people invested in the way things are now and are definitely terrified of a new order coming about. And so I've certainly tried to strategically distance myself from just selling political hot takes, because to me, number one, politics is very meaningful on a theoretical level, but from the day to day is not very meaningful. And there's a lot of people that love it, and like that's their thing. And number two, the things that I enjoy and love, be it the work of art, be it different forms of philosophy and internet anthropology, and also the way that art intersects with politics, I think is a bit different than just pursuing political hot takes. I've come to a point in my life where it's like, okay, Gio, you really choose, like, what is more meaningful to you? Is it really doing this work of and yes, there are quite a bit of resources when it comes to plein air painting, when it comes to the work of art in general. There's a lot of YouTubers that do it, but not a lot around the region that I'm in. And I think that I can do it in a different way, where I can sort of merge these different things, where I'm not just going to, if you love the podcasting, obviously Content Minded is there. Obviously Digital Archipelago is there. And I know that, like, in terms of the bigger, larger podcasts in the same sphere, I know that Digital Archipelago is sort of like at the bottom, but we do things differently. We don't just, yes, the first hour of the show is like the news and discourse, but notice how it's not the first hour anymore. Maybe it's the first 30 minutes. Maybe one day it'll be just the first 20 minutes. Because we have other interests and we have other academic subjects that we enjoy and that I enjoy. And I know, like, the thing is, political hot takes are very addicting. But I noticed that people are getting pretty strange and pretty crazy. And so, to me, it's like, yeah, it's important, and I'm going to talk about politics a little bit right now, but what really, as the more I'm doing it, as I have I have the physical ability to go out more and paint. And, I'm still doing a lot of studio work. There's a lot of studio paintings I want to do. There's the Zarathustra series. Maybe one day, if a gallery in the States ever wants to take it on, like, I have one idea. talking with my friend Zach Brown. Maybe we would do stuff together. So, and yeah, definitely when there's another exhibition in London with Matthew Stout and Fen de Villiers and my other friends like Ardino that does it, Ryan Dufferin, like I will certainly be a part of that as well. And still my book has yet to come out. So there's a myriad of things that I like to think I'm good at or competent at. I'm not the best painter in the world. There's other things on my plate that I find more meaningful, frankly. Like, oh, but you're gonna bash me? No, I'm not bashing anybody. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say that. I think that just pursuing hot takes, political discourse, being a take seller, I think to me that wears thin spiritually. And when it comes to the work of art, when it comes to other things that lay outside of just the current news and discourse, because let's face it, as I've said in DA, I'm not afraid to say it here. As the next maybe next year or 2, 3 years, who knows what's going to happen with American politics, certainly. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in Canadian politics. But, you got to realize, like, maybe I said this to my friend, Twitter space, Mr. D. I said, when you look around, when you look at younger people in places like Canada and in Europe and the UK, maybe not so much in Germany, but yeah, there's a lot of energy in Germany, but they are being suppressed by the state. Same in the UK. In the UK, in their draconian speech laws. But if you look at it, places like Canada and in the UK and in Europe, the dissident spheres on the right and even the left, I would say, they're sort of starting ex nihilo. They're starting with a blank slate, and they don't have a lot of brickolages of previous political movements on their side that are weighing them down. Now, in Canada, the Conservative Party, yes, is weighing us down, but they've been out of power for 10 years. And maybe it'll be 12 or 13 years or 14. And so we're not like burdened by Harperism. And yes, there is a lot of, like, this is what I'm saying. There's a lot of very bad things that are happening in Canada. To me, there's people that do a lot of good when it comes to focusing on Canadian issues. And yes, they might not have the biggest market share because America is the biggest audience for everything. But when it comes to what I do, I can only, as an artist and as someone who, I wouldn't say I'm like a thinker, but maybe I am, who knows? I can only really either offer a deeper analysis or offer what I find to be the spirit of Canada in the work of art, in plein air painting, and to carry forth the tradition of the group of 7 that have come before me. And so that is the way that I can cope if things get really bad. And a lot of people are losing confidence in the managerial state in Canada, in the Laurentian elite, as they become more complacent and sclerotic and as they panic. Then, who knows? I mean, we look at the UK, but it's the same with the UK and their ruling class. As these places become more economically unviable, then the ruling classes will get scared because they've invested for so long in the way things are. I think that certain takes I've seen where they're like, well, if it wasn't for MAGA and Trump in America, then then the right and the rest of the world would be totally crushed or whatever. I don't know about that because I think that I can only know from the thing. There was recently a thing where JD Vance said, well, it's your fault. You could blame Trump and you could blame us, but really it's your fault because you kept electing them. And I think, like, okay, there is a certain truth there. There is a truth that a lot of Leaf Libs have essentially sold the futures out from under their children. A lot of boomer Canadian liberals, that are propping up the Laurentian elite, yes, it is true that they kind of deserve a lot of what's coming, but a lot of people don't. And then I think that the calculus of, the tariffs were meant to stir up the ruling class in Canada, that didn't work because people were going to double down. And frankly, yeah, you should think, well, I am a Canadian. And and I understand, like, a lot of Canadian industry, there is like the argument that we've tariffed America because our industries would be crushed if it wasn't for that. And so, yeah, I understand. But I think the take that, thank God that Donald Trump's in power or else, like, I think that's wearing thin as time moves on. And yes, it is true to an extent that us Canadians, we kind of really did ourselves in the past 10 years, but a lot of us haven't. And a lot of it is the same problems that the managerial elites in a lot of these Western nations, it's very similar. And so you're going to blame everybody? There is a difference between actually being in power and just having these signifiers and symbols and aesthetics of power. The elites in these nations, they know that things cannot last forever. And so this gets to this article I was reading about Canada going through its own, like, Brezhnevism, where, Brezhnev in the Soviet Union, this Palladium article, and, Palladium, they had me blocked on Twitter, and I'm not a big fan of a lot of the writers, but this was a good piece. I'm not really into the whole, like, techno post-NRX type of stuff, which is, like, sort of like a weird form of, like, managerialism by another name. I was much more in the whole, like, religious, let's call it mystical element of the blog sphere when it came to that type of stuff. I don't know why Palladium blocked me, maybe because I was a part of Thermometer magazine, who knows. But anyways, it was a good article where he was talking about how, like, the sort of economic stagnation, how youth feel very cold and detached, and things seem to get progressively worse. He was talking about Vancouver. A lot of smart people can't find jobs, so they go to America. A lot of people, younger people, feel like there is no future, there is not an ability to buy anything. But also the problem of rent seeking, where, because there's sort of like what happened during Brezhnev, where economic production stagnated, and there was a sort of leveling to where sort of like cooking the books when it came to job numbers. They offered exorbitant wages for minimal workers. So all the smart people that were sort of rock stars, scientists and professors during the Soviet Union Stalin years, they were denigrated. They were, like, in the dumps because people could just coast on a marginal existence by being a service worker or whatever. And now that mass immigration has saw to it that not even people born here could get an opportunity for service work, and then buying a house is impossible, it's like the same thing. And there was a lot of very different parallels. This guy, he talks about how a lot of people in development in Vancouver and other major cities in Canada, the boomer sclerotic elites and these planning committees, they just reinterpret zoning and bylaws to make sure that nothing gets built. And the things that do get built for housing chew up viable land for things like farming, like here in Ontario, the Fruit Belt, basically housing people that some of them are down in the dumps that they want to move. I was even listening to talk radio where there was people that were here for a long time. They're like, well, I might as well just move back to my relatives in Europe or Iran or wherever, and it's more viable there. This guy was actually talking about a friend of his that was Iranian, whose parents came here after the Shah fell, where he's like, well, all the people my father grew up with, they have it pretty good in Iran. Whereas here, it's like, you can't buy property anymore in Vancouver. But he was saying he goes to these, like, committees, these business people, and he's talking to these old boomers that have these stuffy 90s suits. And it's very much like a picture of the Brezhnev years where you have these old guys, these olds that were just too complacent and didn't want to do anything. He's like, I'm trying to talk to them about the future of Canada and strategic management and business opportunities and getting young people employed and building infrastructure that isn't just resource intensive, because that can only go so far on the global market. When you have like places like Russia and China and even America opening up new resource pipelines and business ventures, and Trump's trying to like deregulate everything rapid fire to make sure all the resources in America can exploit and capitalize on, and the tariff thing. These people, these olds, they're talking about going to their stupid rundown cottages and golfing trips, not even exotic trips, because they're not proper elites. It's like, oh, going to the cottage, going to golfing. They're not maybe going to Florida. They're not talking about what it means because they don't care. They have theirs, who cares? Very similar to a lot of Soviet commissars. The end of the article talks about how you can manage through a liquidity crisis. I'm not good with numbers, but then if there's no money coming in, I think there could be a situation where you could have an economic retraction, but Canada has to cope with being like a lot of these smaller European nations that aren't maybe as economically salient. The thing is, kind of like the Soviet Union, there is a buildup of the managerial system that it can cope for a little bit. It can cope for having a smaller population, not having as good of a dollar as America, not being as economically salient on the global market. But it could be what Marshall McLuhan in the 50s called the small view, where we don't have to like be as raucous and ostentatious and as liberal as America was. And unfortunately, Diefenbaker, to fight liberalization, he got, this is what the article was talking about, got rid of the Averill Arrow program, cut the military, cut a lot of economic opportunities that we could have had. But you can deal with that with a smaller population that can get by on resources, that can get by on becoming a sort of fortress. But when you have destructive policies of the Liberal Party of the past 10 years, when you have this inflation of populations in Canada, when you have a total gutting of all cultural productions, when you have this like neoliberal nonsense, like the worst of both market socialism, neoliberalism, and mass immigration, the absolute worst of the sort of transnational progressive policies, then the Laurentian elites soon realize that it's unsustainable. But as long as the boomers are happy before they slough off of their mortal coil, as long as their housing prices are secure, as long as their liquidity is secure before they get mated or whatever, then, it's like the opportunity for younger people, they don't care. And so it's like the olds eating the young. The thing is, you can have a restructuring. It's going to be very bad. But when the Laurentian elite sort of peters off just because there's not a lot of vitality when it comes to newer blood, who have better ideas, who have more of a competency, then what's going to happen? It's going to be kind of like the Soviet Union collapsing. And there's a mass period of instability in the 90s, for example. But then we all know what happened after that. The point being is that there will be a time of great instability. But in terms of Canada finding its own soul, there will also be great opportunity as the Laurentian elites suffer a serious crisis of legitimacy and a serious crisis of competency. So we'll see what happens. Now, I might talk more about this, but to me, I realized I can doom and gloom, and it will be very doomy and gloomy for a while. But there is something within the land of Canada that calls forth. It's like what Heidegger calls the calling, right? There is the calling of being in the work of art that I think is more meaningful. And I see the way things are, and I see a lot of younger people are pissed off. And maybe Carney can finagle some economic policies that will stave off a total collapse. Who knows? I think it would be all right, but it seems that the tariffs combined with economic stagnation, unemployment, the impossibility of living, the way the expensiveness of even ordinary life of groceries, even going to McDonald's is expensive nowadays. A lot of things are bad. But maybe an economic retraction might not be the worst thing. It will be pretty bad, but in terms of saying, okay, as Canadians, we have to like find a sense of ourselves. And maybe, thinkers like McLuhan were correct. That maybe if we don't have this like trying to keep up with the global rat race between China and America, require a lot of contractions, require a lot of other policies that I don't want to really get into specifics over. Maybe the younger people in Canada will find a way, even more so than younger dissidents in America on the left and the right. Certainly on the right, who knows? Because when you're unburdened by what has, I know the Kamala Harris, when you are unburdened by what has been, right? What was the phrase, unburdened by what has been? When you are unburdened by what has been, when you are when the Conservative Party, when they fail as well, when the Calgary elite fails, they're just as sclerotic. They're even more rootless and aimless than the Laurentian elites. They have even less of a vision of what Canada is. And all their nonsense about what about separating and what about balkanizing Canada? What about maybe it's good if we get absorbed by America. Like it's all nonsense. They have even lesser of a vision than the Laurentian elites, their liberal Laurentian counterparts. So the only way I can really meaningfully respond to things as an artist and as a thinker is to really look at the long view. If you look at the writings of people in the group of seven, they knew, they kind of, and I will expand upon this in podcast. I did an episode of Content Minded on the group of seven. You can go and see. But they had a vision. They had a vision for what Canada is that was imprinted in their depictions of the rawness of the Canadian landscape. Okay, that was some audio from when I was traveling. I have a little bit of time before the video ends, but I wanted to, if you've made it this far, say I'm very grateful for listening to these videos and watching them. And like, share, subscribe, hit the bell. And of course, I have hours upon hours of podcasting content on my Patreon and Substack, but I will soon have videos as well. Maybe even just painting videos with music. I have a number of musician friends. But I wanted to sort of wrap up what I was saying. There's other things I cut off. I cut out about politics in general in terms of flavor of the day. But I've sort of wanted to express my frustration with just essentially selling political takes. The audio is better because I'm no longer I don't know, I have my professional microphone instead of the little iPhone microphone that I have when I'm driving. So anyways, bear with me. Yeah. But I like to think the content rules overall despite the quality. There is something very deep about the work of art that is something that people don't think about nowadays, which is informing a sense of nationhood and forming a sense of the purpose, not in an instrumental way, I don't think, but the purpose in a very deep level about what a people are doing and what their engagement with daily life is. Even something as simple, what Heidegger talked about with Van Gogh's peasant shoes, inscribing in a very deep and meaningful and profound way the life of the peasant woman, the shoes that Van Gogh painted from a peasant woman that he was, interacting with, and so on and so forth, that brings together the uniting of the earth and the world. The earth is like the material facts, the material elements of life, and the world is what we create or what we perceive or what is mutually created in things like culture, politics, religion, you name it, right? I know I'm butchering Heidegger, but the metaphor is apt. Now, the group of seven, their concern very much was a sense of a new nation that can cut through the contradictions of this new thing arising in America and the old world of Europe. And so it's very important. It's something that I certainly look to when it comes to the problems that my nation faces nowadays. And I think that near the end of this article that I mentioned from Palladium, it doesn't really go into specifics about solutions besides having managers with, and again, this is very Palladium esque, having managers with vision. But, managers can be creative and visionary, and there are certain, Soviet commissars, for example, that bucked the trend back in the day, but that can only get you so far. The work of art, in my opinion, informs your position in the greater world. Not simply as a sort of, how shall I say, intercultural, multicultural dialogue. Because the only way to have a dialogue with the other is to have a sense of yourself and who you are, what you're doing. And even something as simple as plein air painting, as I was saying, really hit home to me. This place that these places I've inhabited my whole life. Now here, this painting I've done in the Short Hills, which is relatively close to me. This is again another demonstration. Now this painting unfortunately was wiped out a little bit in transport, so I will redo it. I'm not exactly happy with it, so maybe I'll end with describing it. So here it is. I'm going to probably retouch it in the future, and yeah, so I will talk more about this as I go, but I'm very glad for everybody listening to this. And like I say, like, share, subscribe, please support the content, and God bless.